Hey, everybody, welcome. We are Monday live with my special guest. You know him. Tomorrow, Don Stewart's going to be joining me live right now. Please welcome our good friend, John Haller. John, good to see you.
Hi. So you're starting off the week with the young guy.
Yeah, starting off the week with the young guy. I got young guys all week, right? When I'm the youngest one, you know there's a problem when I'm in my 60s.
Oh, boy.
So this is what we have today, everybody. Are you guys holding on to this? This is going to be exciting. We have problems in the Middle East, water, not what everybody's thinking, war. We're talking about water, famine, and oil. Sudan, their impact on the Abraham Accords, who's behind it? Russia and Iran, are they sending a message to Saudi Arabia and the UAE? Earth Day religion, it's official. We've been talking about it. Romans chapter 1, they'll worship the creation rather than the creator. And then, of course, this one, the elephant in the room of the day. Tucker Carlson is no longer employed at Fox News. I mean, is that a shocker, John?
You know, you expect this to happen at some point. I mean, certainly he was the big kahuna over there in terms of ratings and everything. And wait a minute, Tom, I'm just checking my text messages. I want to make sure it's not the Murdochs asking me to come fill in. And
you're gonna go fill in at
no,
Fox News?
I guess it's not. So
yeah, is Budweiser gonna hire you for their next marketing?
Yeah, or as we refer to it here in Columbus, we have a huge brewery here. We call it Transhauser-Busch. So after that, the debacle with Bud Light, what a ridiculous, I mean, what kind of world are we living in where this stuff happens? So look, Tucker, there were times, and I will confess, I usually watch Tucker because I thought especially his long form interviews were really good. Like the interview he did with Robert Kennedy Jr., a year and a half ago or whenever it was in the midst of the Charlie Vector thing was really superb. I mean, it was a great interview and covered. I mean, he really gave Robert F. Kennedy Jr. a good way to go. And I'll confess, I was one of the guys, I was a bit skeptical of Robert F. Kennedy Jr. because of his extreme environmentalism that he seems to have been involved with for many years. But you know, you got to listen to guys talk about what they know about, and he seems to be pretty knowledgeable on the subject. So anyway, so I like Tucker. I watched him, but every now and then I would look over at Pam and I would just say, he is such a jerk. I mean, I can't believe he's talking about, I mean, come on, Tucker, give it a rest. And there's a few things. He was just like a dog with a bone. You could not get him off. So listen, the simple answer may be that he wanted to talk about something. Murdoch said no. Tucker said, I have creative control of my program and my contract. So I quit.
Well,
it could be that simple.
It could be, because this is what Robert Kennedy tweeted out today, Jr. Fox fires Tucker Carlson 5 days after he crosses the red line by acknowledging that the TV networks pushed a deadly and ineffective Charlie Vector thing. Unfortunately, Tuesday, this is going to go on YouTube. I don't want to have to cut out too much from what we're talking about.
Right.
To please their pharma advertisers. Carlson's breathtakingly courageous April 19 monologue broke TV's two biggest rules. Tucker told the truth about how greedy pharma advertisers controlled TV news content, and he lambasted the newscasters for promoting the Charlie Vector thing. They knew to be, let's just say, problematic, because I don't want to have to start editing everything out of this for today. I don't mind if our guys get that a little bit, not the whole thing. So with that, I mean, it sounds like it's kind of like both. Okay, they fired him, but he made them fire him, because he knew he crossed all of their red lines. So it's like, you're going to if you want to get rid of me, you're going to have to get rid of me, and I'll give you a reason to get rid of me.
Well, right now, look, the nice thing is that I've kind of noticed the last couple of days, it seemed like the news cycle had slowed down a little bit. So we needed something to get everybody fired up to have something to talk about. I see all this. Oh, he was fired because he was too conservative. He was too truthful. We don't care that he was fired because he was always controlled opposition and you could never trust him. And he was way out in outer space on the alien thing. So, I don't know. He was certainly had things we didn't agree with him on. But I think on balance, he did a pretty good job. And, a lot of this, Fox settled that big lawsuit last week over the election claims of Dominion.
Yeah.
Paid out about $787 million, which is really kind of a drop in the bucket. By the way, I don't know how much Tucker made, but if they're paying Rachel Maddow $40 million at MSNBC, he's got to be making a couple times that easy. So look, he's got some money saved up. He can do what he wants. I can tell you right now, if he went out like a Joe Rogan, or a Megyn Kelly, he would be well into nine figures very quickly.
Rather rapidly, probably within a week or two. So I didn't know this. Diane Williams commented on here. Don Lemon was fired too, but no one cares. So I didn't know Don Lemon was fired, but I don't.
He was fired shortly after Tucker was either fired or quit or whatever. Yeah, Don Lemon is gone. As Tucker used to, the Tucker Memorial phraseology here we'll use, Don Lemon was fired from CNN.
You got all this stuff today. Okay, I'm going to ask you. Go ahead. You're going to say something?
No.
Okay. So we have a lot we're going to get into. I do want to get into Sudan's impact on the Abraham Accords, who's behind it, what's going on with Russia and Iran and their message sending to UAE and Saudi Arabia. But before we get to that, and a couple of other things regarding the water issue that nobody hears about in the Mideast, I want to ask you about Pentecost.
Sure.
So you just did a message on Pentecost, and apparently it wasn't long enough because people wanted you to talk even longer. So,
well, one guy, the one guy who didn't fall asleep said he'd like it to be about 4 hours longer. No, it's interesting. I mean, as I was kind of preparing it, Tom, it kind of brought together a whole bunch of themes and stuff that I like to talk about. In fact, I'm doing a conference in Canada at the end of next week in Calgary. And so I'm going to talk about first coming Messiah, second coming Messiah, and the kingdom in Jerusalem. But it kind of tied a lot of the themes together. Maybe I should just extend out what I prepared for Sunday, and then I have all my talks ready to go for Canada. But, the feasts are prophetic. The spring feast, of which Pentecost was one, was fulfilled at Jesus' first coming. But then we have the fall feast. And then we also have the outliers, the Purim and Hanukkah, which I think are incredibly significant feasts. But as I was preparing it, the first talk I'm going to give in Canada was about I'm using the verse where it talks about, behold, you Bethlehem Ephratah, out of you comes the Messiah. And the reason I was thinking that was when I was at the media summit back in December, I went over to the home of some new friends for Shabbat. And he's a Jewish rabbi. He's a committed Zionist, very tied to the Hebron community. They live in Efrat. And that's where the girls that were killed in that terrorist attack about a week and a half ago were the mother and the two daughters who died. And as we were driving up, there was kind of interesting because it's between Bethlehem and Hebron. And as we're driving in, there's a junction there, and there's a strip center there called the Gush Etzion Junction. And a few years ago, I think it was 4 years ago, there was this kind of larger-than-life Israeli guy named Ari Fold. And Ari was just a really proud Jew who loved Israel, was a Zionist, and he was conservative. But he was at a strip center there on a Sunday morning. His wife set him down from the community of Efrat, where these people live, like the Fleischers and my friends, and Caroline Glick lives up there, Avi Abalo, some of the social media people. And he was at a strip center, and a young Arab guy came up and stabbed him in the back. And Ari fell down. He was a very big guy, very athletic. And he got up and chased the guy and pulled out his weapon. And as they use the term over there, he neutralized him. And then Ari collapsed and died at the scene, because the guy, when he stabbed him, had severed his aorta. But he chased him, 100 yards down through the shopping center, maybe, and took him out. And I remember, because he was a Facebook, I don't know if he was a Facebook friend or I followed him or whatever, but I remember hearing about it on my way to church that Sunday morning, and it just really had a big impact on me. Well, anyway, when I go to these people's house for Shabbat, they live you turn right there by the intersection where Ari died. And so it helps you understand of what they live with every day, of how this place is. And so the Fleischers have a very interesting story. They met in law school in New York City. They came from very non-religious homes. They're now very committed, Orthodox, not ultra-Orthodox, but Orthodox. And they love Israel. When they moved to Israel, they lived at Bethel for a while. And then they lived on the Mount of Olives. So they've lived like right in the biblical heartland this whole time that they're there. But they live there with around people who lose a spouse or a wife and daughters in these terror attacks. And they live there. But as I was driving to the airport or on my flight home, I was sort of thinking about my Calgary talks, and it kind of popped in my head, OU, Bethlehem, Ephrata. And I'm like, I was just in Efrat. I was just there where all of this happened. So this Sunday I do Pentecost, and Pentecost is this, great feast. And here is all this stuff coming together, because what do they do on Pentecost in Jewish synagogues? They read the book of Ruth. And the book of Ruth takes place in Bethlehem and Efrat. And so when we went to Hebron, which is where David started, and Ruth was the great-grandmother of David. I think it was great-grandmother of David.
Yep.
This is where David ruled in Hebron. And so we were there, and as you walk around the Tell there in Hebron, near where David's palace was when he first ruled for the first 7 years of his monarchy, you're right there is the tombs of Jesse and Ruth. So it's like all of these things converge together. And then you read, and you'll like this, because we've talked about this a number of times before, because we think this is pretty important. The Pentecost is one of the pilgrimage feasts. And so they would go to males were required, if they could, come 3 times a year to the pilgrimage feasts, Passover, Pentecost, and Tabernacles. And they would go to the Pool of Siloam, and they would wash in the Pool of Siloam, and then they would walk up the pilgrimage road that they're excavating and will open here in the not too distant future, singing the Psalms of Ascent. And so I'm just thinking, like, all this stuff is coming together, these appointed times that the Lord has. So there was an appointed time, and the teaching in Judaism is that the Torah was given to Moses on Pentecost. And then he came down and they had the golden calf, and 3,000 were taken and were killed because of their worship of the golden calf. But then on Pentecost, 3,000 were added to the church. At a particular time, in a particular season, on a particular day that was very important, that the Lord wanted to use to teach us something. So I remember pulling one passage out of Acts chapter 2. I just really focus on 2:1 and sort of set it up with a study about the feast a little bit. But there's a phrase in Acts chapter 2 when it started talking about the prophecy of Joel around verse 15 or so, 16. And it says, Peter, says, this is that which was prophesied. And so my comment was, we live at a time where there may be preachers get up, and it may be on a future Pentecost, and say, this is that which was prophesied. Because I really think we're at that stage.
So what is that? I mean, work that out for just a second. There's a couple people that email both you and me, because they include us both.
A few.
And they have a little bit of the charismatic side involved, and a passage like that will come into these emails sometimes. So just a curiosity, how do you work that out when we see if Luke is writing that, Peter is saying it. It was Peter who said that in Acts chapter 2, wasn't it?
Yeah.
This is what Joel had prophesied. So he writes as if it's the fulfillment of it. But really, I look at it as it will have its ultimate fulfillment still in the future. So you see it that way too?
Yeah, so, it's a pattern. It's a pattern. So God works in these patterns. So for example, when you go to Hebron, you go to the tomb of the patriarchs. I'm sure you've been there. And it's an incredibly moving thing. So you're sitting there at these places where they have memorials, not the actual tombstones, but they call them cenotaphs. And people go there to pray and remember what Abraham meant to the Jewish people, and Sarah and Jacob and Leah and Isaac and Rebekah. But they're buried in the cave underneath the structure that stood there for a couple thousand years. And so there's this, I don't know, there's like this very integrated connection to the land and timing and that sort of thing. Now, the Jewish tradition, by the way, at the tomb of the patriarchs, is that it not only was the reason Abraham wanted to buy this cave was because it was the cave where another couple had been buried, Adam and Eve, and that it was at the outer marker of the area that they, where they could go no further after they fell and were kicked out of the Garden of Eden. That this was as close as they could get to the Garden of Eden. Now, that's a Jewish tradition that's taught down in that area. I don't know if it's true or not. It's very interesting, though. But there's this connection with the land, the place, the time of season, the pattern, that type of thing. So we know that there's this great conflict between Jew and Arab today. I think that relates back to the conflict between Jacob and Esau. Esau is Edom, and the Arab people in that area today they consider themselves Edomites, descendants of Esau and Ishmael. But that Jacob and Esau, at the death of Isaac, came to the cave and reconciled. And so they believe there that this great reconciliation that will take place in the future will take place at that place. It will germinate at that place and then spread. Because all of these, so that's what's so interesting about Israel, is that all these places and all these times and all these seasons and all these things are all connected. So when we talk about the Pentecost being a pilgrimage feast, they go to the Pool of Siloam, they walk the pilgrimage road up to the Temple Mount, singing the Psalms of Ascent. And now they want to do that for everybody, including Christians, so that we can all do that together. I think it's incredibly interesting timing that all this is happening.
I do too. I don't find it just a coincidental time as Israel keeps up their excavations and more things are uncovered. They know what they've got all over the land of Israel. I remember Beit Shemesh, the first time I went there, they hadn't really done much excavating at all. You go there now, there's areas they do not even allow you to wander. They won't allow you to pull over your car anymore. There's so many things, but they've known these areas exist. And what I
And
find,
they've really only excavated what, maybe 2 to 5% of places.
probably, maybe, John, I look at it like this, and what you said just really, man, it just, I love this because I believe during the millennial kingdom, one of the things we're going to be doing is part of the discovering more and more and more. I think more is going to be revealed in the millennial kingdom than even this side. And one of the things I think is really cool, you were just there in Israel, and I'm going in like 2 weeks. And a group's coming. Some of you guys watching right now are going to be there with me. But we get to go to the Pool of Siloam. They've started the excavation at the other part, so we get to see that. And the Pilgrim Road, I did a video just at the entrance of it. You know, you could do that back, I was there November, I think. I was there a few weeks before you. I did that with Air Sassoon. But when you were there, I think they were getting ready to open it up. And
I think they still had 100 yards to excavate. So the length of the road from the Pool of Siloam to the Temple Mount is roughly a half mile. It's about 800 meters.
And it's about like this. It's uphill.
Yeah, that's what I mentioned that in my sermon yesterday, that Google Maps is a fraud, because as I was walking around Jerusalem, I was going to go from I was there by the menorah, and I was going to downtown Jerusalem down there on Jaffa Street to a restaurant to meet some friends, Brian Schrager, Seth Fransman, Jonathan Spire, a couple of the greatest Middle East correspondents. I was pleased to be able to have dinner with them that night. And it said my route says mostly flat, which meant that it was sort of smooth. I didn't have to climb up a cliff.
There's no such thing in Jerusalem.
It was uphill all the way. I went out with a guy from the UK who does a Middle East show there on one of the Christian networks, and so we were down by the old rail station in in Jerusalem, and we walked down towards into the city of David. And he says, well, let's go up to the Jaffa Gate and catch a cab. And I'm looking, it's like 700 feet. It's like a 70-story building.
It's like
to climb, but my app says mostly flat.
Mostly flat, yeah.
What a fraud that was.
There's no such thing as mostly flat in Jerusalem.
I know. It's either, and you always know that if you're doing the down, you're going to do the up.
Yes, that's right.
It's got to equal out.
It's like you're at the city of David, and your first time there, you've never been there before. Oh, you're going to get to go Hezekiah's Tunnel or around it. You're going to end up at the Pool of Siloam. Oh, this is great. If you think about it, you're going like this for a long ways. When you get to the bottom, you're going back up, and however you get back up, but you are going up. But I guess
you hope the bus is there to pick you up to
take
you back up.
Sometimes, hopefully.
But when we were there in December, though, they took us, the Christian Media Summit, they took us down to the Pool of Siloam, and there's a little bit of it there, and the water's coming from the spring there, which is kind of interesting. And the wall there that you can see, there's like a rock wall, a natural rock wall, and then it's like somebody's backyard. Well, now that whole thing has been excavated just since I was there in December. They're bringing in front end loaders and stuff, because they said, well, somebody just filled in the pool. We don't have to worry about the stuff in it. But it's just so interesting to me, Tom, that when we're talking about the temple and the red heifers and the conflict over the Temple Mount and proposals about peace agreements and that type of thing, which would involve the Temple Mount. I personally think the Saudis would like to do something. We can talk about that in a minute if you want.
I do want to, yes.
But it's all converging at the same time.
It is. And let me ask you this, John. Like I said, I really enjoy talking with you. And like I said, off the record, some people can talk a lot, but they don't really say anything. You talk. I just thoroughly enjoy talking with you. Oh, before I want to ask you a little bit more about the Pilgrim Road, because I see it the same way you do, totally the same way, which gives me an idea of the proximity of things. But before we go there, a couple of quick things just for everybody. You're going to be in Calgary, and I'm going to be in North Carolina. So tell everybody where you're going to be in Calgary, because We have a lot
Yeah.
of viewers from Canada here.
It's called the Last Days Bible Conference, and the website is ldbc.ca. And I don't know if it's going to be live streamed or not. And the information is on the website.
Okay.
So that's the 5th and 6th in Calgary.
Okay, great. So if you can,
May 5th and 6th.
if you're in that area, go see John and tell him I said hi. And I'll be in North Carolina this weekend with Billy Crone and Ken Michael. So if you guys are in the North Carolina area, I know there's registration. It might be full, but I'd love to meet you guys there too. And for all of you going to Israel with me, you're going to get to see the things John's talking about right now. Okay, John, to the Pilgrim Road. I totally see it like you do. It's not a coincidence that Pilgrim Road, the Pool of Siloam, is opening up. That is, going to be excavated. This is God preparing the Jews for what they used to do. They're not going to be filling the Pool of Siloam up with water. That might happen during the Millennial Kingdom. I don't see, but to do the Pilgrim Road, the temple, the talk of the temple being built, you mentioned the red heifers. Listen, this is just, I wish everybody could stand in the place where you're talking about and where those going with me will be. It's just, it's hard to explain unless you've been
well,
there.
I think by the way, so Jerusalem at the time of the feast, the pilgrimage feast at the time of Christ and Herod and that sort of thing under the Romans, it would increase in population to probably over 1 million people. Now, to put that in perspective, Rome, which ruled the world at that time, the city of Rome was about 1 million people. So this turned it into one of the major urban centers of activity of the ancient world because of these Jewish feasts. And so, listen, I when we get into the millennium, folks, you ought to practice the Psalms of Ascent and Psalms. Read them.
Oh, totally.
Understand them, because you're going to do them.
Amen. Amen. John, I'd love to do, you probably do the same thing when you go there with the group. We every day on the bus, we'll do a Psalm of Ascent or even one of the Hallel Psalms, because they're so connected and they're all both about the feast. But it's just so cool just to talk about this. Mm-hmm. Knowing I'll be there soon, knowing people are going with us, knowing you were just there, and knowing what's coming. This person just asked this question: have any of the red heifers been disqualified? This is from KP Bro. I think one was so far, right?
I think one was out of the 5 that were brought from America. By the way, the Psalms are very, very practical books in many respects because they're worshipful. And but if you read the New York Times, you can go to the imprecatory Psalms and kind of get your religion correct there too. So, or read about the politics that are going on in America, or the LGBTQIA plus minus 0 exclamation point.
Whatever
agenda.
The rest is.
Yeah.
No kidding. This is just really exciting to think, just the whole Pool of Siloam. I just see it all coming together, all at a particular time. It is not a coincidence. And so when I was there last time in November, John, I tried to, there's a picture I'll see on the internet, and I was inside that City of David store, right where you walk in at the top. And I tried to purchase that so I could use it on my website, and they wouldn't sell it to me. So I'll get it from somewhere. I want to ask you.
I got an official hat from the City of David, but that's probably, I didn't have to buy it, I guess is so let me back up to a couple of something we were talking about, maybe, because you brought up this about when I mentioned this, Peter gets up and says, this is that which was prophesied. And we know there's a passage like that in Matthew. This is that which was prophesied. A virgin shall conceive. And I've often thought about that as were there a bunch of rabbis running around, that time period? Because they knew the Daniel prophecies were kind of coming to a close. At least people in Babylon seemed to know that they were coming to be fulfilled. Were they running around checking, were there any pregnant virgins in Israel or in the area of Ephrat or Bethlehem or anything like that? And I'm not sure that it was. And so that's kind of a lesson too, that sometimes Bible prophecy, we see it and we read it, but until it's fulfilled, we don't really understand.
Yeah.
But then when we live at this time, though, when I do think it's an issue, and I've long advocated that we almost need to have a big symposium about how we're going to handle this, where we need to sort of set some ground rules, because it's very easy. I mean, sometimes, and I don't want to judge people's motives, so I'm not talking about everybody. I'm talking about the people who I'm thinking of, but I'm not going to tell you who I'm thinking of. But they have a tendency, they want to be first. It's sort of like sometimes in prophecy updates, right, people have a tendency, they want to be first to talk about it rather than being right.
Yes.
And so it's a big struggle. I really struggle with it because I don't want to be wrong. So sometimes I get emails from people, why aren't you talking about this? So-and-so at this channel, so-and-so did this. And I'm like, because I haven't really confirmed it yet enough in my own mind. I just want to be careful. But there's going to be a time where we're going to say that this is that which was prophesied. But I don't think it's people who are going to be, it's a one-off. Like I'm the only one that sees it.
Yeah.
Because, established in the mouth of 2 or 3 witnesses. So I think we need to be careful. I'll give you an example that comes to mind, because he's being coronated next week while I'm in sure, one of the Commonwealth countries, King Charles. And there's a pretty well-developed theory from Tim Cohen that others have picked up on. And it's coming back to the fore right now because Charles, they say King Charles is the Antichrist. Tim Cohen wrote a book, 20 years ago, The Antichrist and a Cup of Tea. Yeah. And, now I think he's updating the book and that type of thing. And I don't think it's published yet. And he makes a very compelling case. I will say that. And so when I look at these things, it's sort of like I put things in a basket, like, okay, so here's the Islamic Antichrist basket. Here's stuff about King Charles. Here's one about a European Antichrist. And so I sort of collect information about the others. The thing that I think I try not to do is to be really dogmatic about it. Like, okay, this is the way that it has to work out because this is the way that I believe it's going to work out. And then you do what my young associates and what I did when I was a young lawyer, putting trials together. You have this massive amount of facts and emails and documents and all these things. And what the tendency is for young lawyers to do is that everything they pick up proves their case. Everything they read proves their case. And I think there's a tendency to do that in the Bible prophecy community, that everything you pick up proves that my conclusion about how this is going to work out is the way. And so and it may not be, but we'll know in hindsight what it was. And so that's sort of how I approach it. That's why I'm not super dogmatic about certain things.
Yeah, that was excellent. I'm going to comment on that too. Then I want to ask you about Sudan, the impact on the Abraham Accords, who's behind it. I want to get there in just a second, but I just want to confirm what you said. But first of all, somebody commented that Mondo Gonzalez said 2 of the red heifers have been disqualified, and this is the challenge I've had, because people say, why don't you ever talk about the red heifers at all? Today we're talking about the Pool of Siloam, the obvious excavations. It's remarkable to me these things are happening.
But the Pool of Siloam will never be disqualified from being the pool. So
Thank you. So I was just going to say, years ago, I remember when Chuck Missler was talking about red heifers, right? It goes way back to the 1990s. I remember it was like every red heifer I ever thought died, right? Or got disqualified. And so I learned quite some time ago, don't just jump on it because it's the latest thing in the news or something like that. And recently, within the last few months, there were a couple of guys that were all over the internet saying, this is happening, and these things are happening. And I saw it the way you did. I was like, I don't know, because I'm familiar with this situation, and I was very skeptical of it. I know these individuals, and I didn't bite. And I thank the Lord I didn't bite, because I got people very angry at me because I wouldn't comment. You know how that is. It's like, I mean, do you ever get people actually call you a heretic because you won't say something like this? I mean, a heretic because, and then, give it 3 months and it'll probably go away. So I'm not going to mention any names or anything, but it's, I even took comments down from one of my things because of certain comments people are saying about my guest who happened to have been right, 2 months later, it's proven, but whatever,
Right.
But it's just, we can't bite. And your illustration of the young attorneys and the whole, that was great. That was just, that was the best illustration I ever heard for
just to clarify, if I did it as young attorney, it probably was only one time.
Okay. Well, I remember thinking I knew who the Antichrist was about 25 years ago, earlier in my days of Bible prophecy. And one of my old friends challenged me one time. I said, did you ever name who the Antichrist was? He goes, yeah, I did, and all 14 of them died. And then he joked. He goes, listen, I'm joking, but never, ever, ever get caught up in that, because it happens. Somebody will be right sometime, because a broken clock is right twice a day.
I think and they only, one person only has to be right once, and then that sort of settles it all. And I think it's okay to talk about it. I don't mind people talking about it, but it's like, well, if you don't see it this way, then this is and listen, whatever Hal Lindsey wrote back in 1969. The world's changed pretty dramatically since then. But some of the things that Hal wrote about, like we could talk about now, is Sudan, because it's long been in our community the conclusion that Sudan is Cush in Ezekiel chapter 38.
Yep.
And it never really fit in, but then there was Sudan and South Sudan split up, and then Sudan came in a year ago to the Abraham Accords, and so there's been this push. This was one of Netanyahu's stated goals. I mean, we were there when he was forming his government, and a week after we were there, he came out and said, I've got 3 things that I want to do: is stop Iran, make peace with Saudi Arabia, and I can't remember what the third one was right off the top of my head. And so there's been this, and the first 2 are in serious conflict right now. So what you've seen over the past couple months is China has come in, as the United States has, it's sort of like our influence in the world is declined in direct proportion to the inability of our president to do things like form a coherent sentence, make sense, remember which door he's supposed to leave when he walks out of a room, and that sort of thing. And so it seems to be that the United States is sort of tottering along in the world, just like Biden is tottering along in his world. But China's come in, and now there's this, at least the beginning of a normalization process between Saudi Arabia and Iran. And you need to understand, a lot of this really, my conclusion, just looking at the news from the last few days, is this really revolves around Israel. Israel's really central and core to this thing. And so what happened was, with Kushner and Trump, they brought Sudan into the Abraham Accords, where they were normalizing things with Israel. And Sudan sits along the Red Sea, so it's a very important thing. They have oil and gas reserves as well. But so what Iran is doing is Iran is fighting a war on many, many levels against Israel. They instigate things with Hamas, they instigate things with Hezbollah, and even though one is Sunni and one is Shia, they still work together because they're united in opposition to Israel. Now they're fomenting revolution in Sudan because this general that's in charge of Sudan had the audacity to enter into a normalization agreement with Israel a year or so ago. This is all by design. Plus, on top of that, you have Russia and China wanting to have the sea lane there of the Red Sea to control. And the Wagner group, the private mercenary army of the Russians, has been very active in Sudan for a number of years, and so they're sort of fomenting. I'm almost certain that when we write the history, if we're around here long enough to have a history of what happened in Sudan, that you'll see that it was the Russians and Iranians that were causing this current revolution. And part of it is to send a message to Saudi Arabia: don't you dare enter into a normalization agreement with Israel, because we'll do the same thing to your kingdom and take it out. That's what I think's going on. Yeah. It's a message being sent.
I really appreciate the things that you share. Just your observations are, I just find them very intriguing. They make a lot of sense. I want to go to questions for a minute. I know we got several other things I was going to ask you about, the water problem with the Middle East and so forth.
Let me just say that real quick.
Okay.
So listen, there's a guy, there's a lot of people that I follow, not because I agree with everything they say. So like yesterday I said, R.C. Sproul, he made a really good point about something related to the feast or something. And I said, now, so everybody, John's endorsing Calvinism and
you're a radical Calvinist for even mentioning.
Right. And I'm like, no, I'm not, and I have friends very close to the Sprouls, that we have a wonderful time talking about the Lord. So someday, boy, we'll have a great time in the millennial kingdom when all this stuff won't mean anything. But until then, we fight. But Saudi Arabia is, been pushing a couple of things lately through, and I'm sure Mohammed bin Salman endorses them. He's not the king yet, so he can't go full bore because, in the tribal culture that he's raised in, he has to respect his father's wishes. So his father has said he wants the Palestinian issue resolved. So that's the official position of the government. But he's pushed a couple things. One is he allowed a guy to release something about a year ago that said that, Muhammad never went to the Temple Mount in his night journey. That never happened. And it was published in a Saudi newspaper. I think it was late 2020. And then there's also been these articles floated, Wall Street Journal, Al Arabiya, major newspapers, of a proposal called the Hashemite Kingdom of Palestine. Now, whether that is the way this is going to work out or not, but what it would do is it would make a true two-state solution. It would be the solution of Jordan controlling Jordan and the Palestinian areas and Israel. Right now we have a three-state solution. We have Gaza, we have Israel, and we have Jordan. And when these chuckleheads come in and say, oh, well, we want to do a two-state solution, they're really talking about a four-state solution. They want to create another state there called Palestine, which has never existed. So it's very interesting, the timing of all of these things. And it may be, too, that the Saudis or the Iranians and the Russians don't like the Saudis pushing this Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan thing. And so they're sort of sending them a message. Look at what's going on. But in the Middle East, and there's also a guy named Peter Zion who used to be with Stratfor under George Friedman, now is out on his own, and he's got some goofy ideas sometimes. But he did a very good video the other day about the water situation in the Middle East. It's very serious. Turkey has the water. Everybody else has oil. Turkey has water. Prior Turkish ruler said, okay, all you Arabs, go ahead, drink your oil, we'll drink our water. And there's a lack of water in the Middle East. And as Zion said, because of the Ukraine-Russia war, fertilizer, interruption in natural gas supplies, which you need to make nitrogen, which you need to grow food at the level that the food needs to be grown to support populations around the world, that the Middle East is on the cusp of he didn't use these terms, but I might have used the term, a famine that is apocalyptic.
A famine that is apocalyptic. Now,
that could come this year or next.
Okay, this is interesting All of this is interesting. I was up in Washington with Billy Crone over the weekend, and
And
Billy,
Eric Barger.
yeah, and Eric, and Billy was talking about the Ezekiel chapter 38 battle and the resources of the Dead Sea, which you're well aware of, and
Potash, fertilizer stuff.
and actually enough fertilizer in the Dead Sea to supply the entire planet, not to mention everything else that Israel actually has. So people are looking at oil as being this reserve. Well, you start looking at water, you start looking at the Dead Sea, you start looking at things through a different lens, and you go, wait a minute, the Middle East is on this, there's like a convergence, but it's all converging on Israel too, which is intriguing when you look at all of it. It's just absolutely, I mean, you can't make this stuff up. Just can't make it up.
Very interesting time to be alive. That's what I would say. In fact, that's and when I'm doing the conference with Moriel and Jacob in Scotland, the theme is sort of we're going to kind of build off what Jesus said to the disciples, that, you guys, you live at the time, the prophets long to see the day that you're living in.
Yeah. Amen.
And maybe that's the attitude we should be having now, that
it is. I agree.
You know what? The prophets long to see the day that you're living in.
Totally
the
agree.
times in which
Daniel wanted to see these days. The angel said, no,
Sure.
not for you. So I totally think so. By the way, I want a couple of things, then we got to get to some questions. John Geis has a question for us that it all pertains to what you're talking about with the Middle East and the Hashemite kingdom. So we'll get to that in a second, John, amongst anything else we can. But real quick, I saw comments on here about a verse for pre-tribulation rapture. You guys know John and I have a different viewpoint on the timing of it, but we agree on so much. It's great. And someday maybe John and I will just talk about those things.
When the rapture happens, there will be perfect unity in the body of Christ on that issue.
Yes, there will. Yes, there will.
Until then, no.
Yes, there will. And you know what? So just so you guys know, John and I, we do share a little bit of a difference on that, but we tend to agree on so much, and John has become such a great friend and brother that he's going to be speaking with me. He's the only one that's going to be speaking at both of our Hope for Our Times prophecy conferences that are coming, one in San Diego and one in just outside of Dallas in Rockwall. So here's the list of who's speaking at the one in San Diego. It's myself, Greg Denham, Billy Crone, Brandon Holthouse, Don Perkins, John Haller, Scott Townsend, and I might add one more. And so both these are great. In Texas, it's myself, Andy Woods, Olivier Melnick, Bill Koenig, Alex Newman, John Haller, Bill Fetter, and I have a couple of other guys for both of these that I'm not ready to mention yet, but it's going to be great. So John and I are the only ones that are going to be at both.
Not going to be Tucker Carlson, though, right?
Who knows?
He's available now. I mean,
yes, he is. So we have some others that are out there, but I can't wait. And the event registration will be open soon. But with that,
so what's John's question?
Okay, well, we got to get this first before even John's. So
okay.
Somebody had asked about a pre-tribulation rapture verse. So just so you all know, you can go to the conference that I was at with Billy Crone and Eric Barger the other day. It's the End of Days Prophecy Conference that was at Lake Stevens, Washington. You can just Google it, End of Days. Probably put in Eric Barger's name, it'll come up. There's a Q&A that was done. That was the question. Can somebody give me one verse for pre-trib rapture? So each of us just took a different set of verses, and so you can put together the whole thing and go with that. Also on the panel was Pablo Frassini, so it was a great time. And sometime John and I will probably have this conversation right here on our differences, and I guarantee it'll be good because we get along, and neither of us like to yell at each other. So
that's right.
Be great. Okay, John Geis, could you comment on the Dome of the Rock? Is the rock the site of Abraham's sacrifice? Is it a coincidence that it's shaped like a universal church? I didn't hear that before about the universal church, but what are your thoughts? Abraham's sacrifice.
My personal opinion is that rock has been so identified for so long that it's probably the place of Abraham's sacrifice. And again, it's this cycle pattern and place and all this stuff that's very important. So, you see Bethel, all these things happen at Bethel. You see it down at Hebron and that type of thing. So the pattern everybody goes there. It's been established for a long time. So there's three or four different views on the location of the temple. There's that City of David thing, which I heard you talking last week with somebody that I just don't think that holds any credibility. You won't find. In fact, when we were at the City of David, I asked one of the archaeologists there about that theory.
Yeah.
And he looked at me like, what?
Are you
Somebody
nuts?
believes that?
Are you know what, John, totally agree. I agree with you 100%. I did the same thing when I was there. David Tal, I asked, he goes, well, let me introduce you to some of my archaeologist friends. You know, you get to know them after a while anyways. You have Eli Shukron that's over there overseeing City of David for so long, and others. They look at you like you're nuts. One of them told me the problem is that is an American invention.
Right.
And it's what's happened is it's Americans believe it who have never been to City of David before. I had this guy on one of our tours we did, John, several years ago, and he said, we arrive in Galilee, and he's challenging me on that. You know, he watched Ron Wyatt, I think it was, or one of them.
Bob Cornuck.
Bob Cornuck, that's who it was. He watched Bob Cornuck, and I said, brother, let's just wait until we get to Jerusalem, and then we'll talk about it. Let's just wait. It was coming up on the bus. It was like, finally we get to Jerusalem, then we go to the City of David, and he goes, never mind, my question's been answered. I didn't even have to say anything. He just saw the location and said, this is impossible.
There were certain things that were seen from places in Jerusalem into the temple area.
Yeah.
Okay. There's a story. And so for that to have been seen in the City of David, the platform would have had to be like 300 feet high that it was built on. You know, there's not enough junk down there in the City of David to build a platform 300 feet high. I guess there's not enough debris around.
There's not.
To have done it.
Yeah. Plus,
but listen, back to John's question. So I think that's probably the area of Abraham's sacrifice. There's another theory that take the Temple of Baal back, and I've talked about that the last couple Sundays, I think. I took an overlay of the Temple of Baal back from Lebanon and lay it over top of the Temple Mount. And there's a six-sided structure in Baalbek. This Dome of the Rock is eight-sided, but it appears to have been built on a six-sided place. But then there's a Hadrian statue. There's a temple where the Al-Aqsa Mosque is. And then the Hadrian statue, which is the emperor statue, was put over what would be that fountain there, that Al-Qas fountain. So some people think that that's where the Holy of Holies was, because they put the statue of the emperor over the holiest site of the people that were there before, which is very common in that culture to do that. So, but I'm sort of sticking with the traditional site for now. And listen, that thing's an abomination that's there. You know, it has the oldest sayings of the Quran that they have. And a lot of them say God has no son. Don't say that God has a son. That's what's there right now. It's engraved on the walls inside the Dome of the Rock. I've been in there and seen it myself.
Yep, it is there. Brandon Murray says, regarding the letters from Paul, were they inspired by the Holy Spirit or working closely with the apostles? They were inspired by the Holy Spirit. Paul was the one who Jesus captured on the road to Damascus to persecute more saints. And so Paul was definitely inspired by the Holy Spirit. And he worked with, obviously he worked with Peter. We know that from the book of Acts. So we know those things, but it was the Holy Spirit who was ministering to him.
Well, he also, at the end of his life, I did a series once called Famous Last Words. And Paul wrote 2 Timothy. And at the end of 2 Timothy, he says, bring John Mark to me. That was the title of my talk that day. Bring John Mark to me, for he is profitable for my ministry. And he had split up with Barnabas over John Mark.
Well,
but John Mark was the guy who was there at all the stuff that was happening.
Yes,
he was an eyewitness to all these things.
He was.
So
yesterday morning I taught on that, John. The Acts chapter 15, where they had the split, where Paul said, I don't want anything to do with this John Mark character. So Barnabas took him.
I had a pastor friend who once said that the most important person in the New Testament outside of Jesus was Barnabas.
The encourager.
Because Barnabas saw something in John Mark. And John Mark wrote probably the first gospel that was widely circulated.
I think it's great.
It's interesting.
It is interesting. Definitely an encourager, and saw something in John Mark. And just a reminder for us as believers, what do we do? Hey, John, this one's for you. This is from Good Breakfast. Does JH, I'm assuming John Haller, like going long and exhaustive on biblical information and biblical related news? Because I love it. However, my wife struggles with his voice tone. Then they put an LOL. I think your voice is great. I don't know what Good Breakfast is thinking.
My voice tone. Well, yes, I even get to someone else. You're the most arrogant. I like what you say, but you're the most arrogant person I've ever listened to.
Well, you're not. No. Oh, no. No, you're not.
And I'm like,
John, I think your voice tone is fantastic. So maybe I think Good Breakfast's wife's hearing needs a little adjustment. That's what I think.
Well, we'll pray for her. We'll put her at the top of our list. But, look, everybody has personal preferences. There's some people that are really popular, and I'll listen to them, but it's just like, it's really hard because their style doesn't appeal to me. So that's the beauty of the body of Christ. Everybody, all these things work together for one purpose. And we're all different. That's for sure.
Yep. We are. Jennifer Stanford, any new update on the currency stuff, digital stuff? I'll be doing his channel this week with Dennis Swick talking about any updates. That's not going to be till Thursday, though. Do you have anything for right now, John?
No, but I will just say, as I watch it when you do with Dennis Swick, and, those are the ones, I don't get scared by a lot of things. But when you're on with Dennis Swick, it's like, uh-oh, there's something big coming. Happening.
And I asked him last night, I said, hey, what's on the forefront of your mind? What's really pressing on you right now that you want to talk about? And he fired off the text, and basically that's where we're going this Thursday on his channel. So he's pretty excited about it, and he's always got crazy information. Okay. That
stuff seems out of control to me. I mean, it just seems out of control. And then I'll hear all the people say, oh, it's not that big a deal. It's really not that bad. And I really think it is that bad.
I do too. I think it's that bad. Okay, here's this question, then I'm going to let you go. This person asked both you and I, do we plan on staying out of the cage of digital currency?
Well, one is I don't think this is the mark of the beast yet. So I don't think you need to worry about it until it's the mark of the beast. And my personal opinion is that the mark of the beast will be tied to worship of the Antichrist and a complete rejection of Jesus Christ. That's what I think you need to look for in regard to that.
Yep.
And so you're going to have to decide how you're going to function in society without having digital currency and that type of thing. I can't talk what it's about. So it was an issue that I had, a medical issue in the not too recent past. And I talked to somebody about it today. I had a doctor's appointment. So she said, how'd it go? Tom, I picked up my phone and there were ads for drugs dealing with that particular condition.
Imagine that.
I'm not kidding you.
I know you're not kidding me. I was sitting, I've seen these things happen. You go, you know what I've learned to do lately? If I want to find a product and I'm not sure, I kind of want to shop around, all I do now is just mention it near my phone.
Where I could get that putter that would solve all of my putting issues. Oh, and boom.
Too bad I have this earpiece in, then this could hear it and I could get that putter. But that's.
By the way, it wasn't a serious medical condition. It was really nothing, but it was just funny because I literally picked up my phone off of the table and there was an ad.
It's hilarious.
For drugs or for supplements or something. It was so bizarre.
Yeah. Yeah. So I have some other things I'd like to say on that subject too, and how I plan on dealing with the cage. It's coming. Listen, if we're not raptured, we just got to realize we're going to we're going to be in it, but it's not the mark of the beast. And I think we need to understand that. And we're going to go forward in the name of the Lord Jesus Christ. And God's our protector. And I wouldn't trouble myself too much about any of these single things, but recognizing, listen, our citizenship is in heaven. If you're a believer in Christ, we're passing through this world. We have an opportunity to, as you said earlier, John, we live in amazing days the prophets wanted to see, and we're watching them develop more and more. I mean, what exciting time it is to be alive. I'm thinking in the last 2,000 years, this has got to be the most exciting time to be alive. It's amazing.
The prophets long to see the day in which you live.
Totally amazing days. Thank you so much, John. I'm going to let you go.
Thanks, Tom. Always glad to be with you.
I can't wait to talk to you soon. God bless you, everybody.
See you.
And see you tomorrow. Don Stewart will be joining me tomorrow. See you.